Before Father Vien talks, we want to show you a 2-minute video.
They fled once again, many risking their lives on When the communists took over North Vietnam in the early 50s, many fled to the south. Then, in 1975,
35 years of fighting in Vietnam are now ended. The president of South Vietnam has unconditionally surrendered to the Viet Cong.
They fled once again, many risking their lives on overcrowded boats. Thousands found their way to a strange new land where they rebuilt their community. In New Orleans, many took up fishing, something they knew from Vietnam. 30 years later, nearly half the boats on the Gulf of Mexico would be Vietnamese owned. And then, in 2005,
Ladies and gentlemen, I wish I had better news for you, but we are facing a storm that most of us have feared.
many living in New Orleans East lost their homes to Katrina, and the community was nearly lost but for the leadership of Father Vien Nguyen, who helped the community rebuild and fight for its very existence when the city proposed turning their community into open space, and later located a landfill for the toxic waste debris from the hurricane right in the heart of their community. After 5 years of rebuilding after Katrina, things were finally getting back to normal. And then it happened.
50 miles south of Louisiana, a massive explosion lit up the sky.
Now authorities are worried about an environmental catastrophe.
Thousands were out of work, facing an uncertain future of fishing in the Gulf. Once again, the very survival of this community, 80% of which depends on fishing and seafood processing, was in question. The community desperately needed something to give it independence and resilience. The community already had developed the concept of an urban community farm. In the wake of the BP oil spill, there was another idea being put forward.
How can we use new technology to help rebuild the fishing industry and do it sustainably until the Gulf heals, and do it on land? And these are land-based recirculating aquaculture systems. They recirculate 99% of their effluent. There's no discharge, no chemicals or antibiotics.
The Viet Village Urban Farm Sustainable Aquaculture Park. It looked great on paper, but would the community members accept it? At a workshop of community fishers and seafood workers held in late 2010, the project was enthusiastically embraced and is now moving forward. And along the way, it's forging new partnerships and friendships.
Good morning, and I want to thank Dr. Guggenheim for putting that together. I guess a lot of people, as you have heard at the beginning, have forgotten about the the disaster in the Gulf with the BP situation. And actually, that is not forgotten by us who live there, especially my own people who fish there. Just late last night, I got a call from home, from New Orleans, a fisherman from my old parish. Keep in mind now, the last time he went shrimping was 2009. And then the season 2010, as it was about to open, that's when the oil disaster struck. And so they had to delay it for a year. So finally, last week, it was reopened. Almost 2 years later, he and 2 deckhands went out last Sunday. They just came back last night. And the answer was, we caught nothing. So they wasted their time, fuel, all of that cost. Now, so that's just to update you as of last night. As of April 20th of this year, a month ago, BP had announced that it had, it just gave the amount, I don't remember, but we figured out that BP had paid 4,700 claims. That's pretty good. Until you find out that there are 115,000 claims. And BP is refusing to pay it. Keep on delaying it. Why? Because in delaying it, and these people are living based on their work now, at the annual catch. So BP, in delaying paying for repaying or paying the claims, force people into quick payment. What is quick payment? Quick payment is the amount that you take right now and you release BP from all future responsibilities. And so now we're beginning year 2 for my people, and they caught nothing. These are shrimpers, fishers. Now, what about the oysters, people who raise oysters? Remember with the BP oil disaster, fresh water was released to push the oil out. And what happened? It killed all of the oysters because of the change in salinity. So they've just lined the beds. And it takes about 3 years for the oysters to reach market size. Guess what's coming? The rising Mississippi River. And so the floodgates had to reopen, or had to be opened. And with all of the lime oyster beds, they shut. That's another year. Oh, we don't forget. We live it every day. We live it every day. And that's one of the reasons, you see, for us, it started with Katrina. Because post-Katrina, well, prior to Katrina, there were 3 hospitals within a 7-mile radius of where we were, or where we are. Guess how many hospitals are there now? None. So we have to provide for our own health care. I mean, when you're fixing your homes, when you're gutting and fixing your home, what happened if you fall from the roof? We would have to travel right now 13 miles to get to a hospital. 13 miles in regular traffic, that might not be too bad, but when you call an ambulance going 13 miles one way and 13 miles the other way, think about when you have a heart attack, what that 13 miles would be. Our people could not return because they had no place to put their children in for school. So we had to open our own school. Now, I don't know if you knew this. New Orleans East, prior to Katrina, was 1/4 of Orleans Parish, our county population, about 94,000. Post-Katrina, it was 2 years after Katrina before the first supermarket reopened in the area. It is still the only one. Prior to that, we had to go some 23 miles to shop. Okay? And so for 2 years. So finally, one of the thoughts concerning the urban farm was, our people were gardening already. Why not pull all of that together, systematize it, so that we can provide for our own food, so that later on, when something like Katrina happens again, then we, the community members, would determine when we are going to return, where we're going to put our children, whether or not we'll reopen our clinic, our schools, and we'll provide our own food. That was the thought all the way up until April 20th, 2010. At that point then, as we have just rebuilt, and our fishing vessels about to ready to go out and make a living again, this happened. BP disaster struck. And so our people were held back, not knowing what to do. And this was where we began to think about, now how do we also provide that type of security, both in terms of food and occupation and employment. And that's when we were thinking about the possibility. Actually, it was Dr. Guggenheim who someone introduced him. He came to the community and he was talking about conservation. He said, well, what about land-based aquaculture? What about us raising our own fish so that no BP oil can touch it, or any oil can touch it, so that our people's employment would not be disrupted? And that's when we started working together. And up to this point now, we, with the Johns Hopkins Carey Business School, having completed its feasibility study for us, we are moving to the next phase. Hopefully, and the idea here is that we'll do the land-based aquaculture, the tanks, and then the water from there would go and provide nutrient for the herbs and the vegetables, and then it would be recirculated back to the tank. And the nutrients from the plants then would help feed the fish. That's the idea that we are working on at this point. So in that sense, when Dr. Guggenheim came to visit us, his idea was Conservancy. And he met us. Our idea was food security and self-determination, sustainability. And lo and behold, it looks like the two sides can work together and can both benefit from it. Now, the idea here is, what are we to do about Conservancy and all of that? We can take the bandage approach and just patch it up here and there. But what about providing, like what we are proposing, providing a new source of fish, of seafood, so that our fishers would not have to take as much from the Gulf, from the ocean? Wouldn't that be part of Conservancy? Why not support us in that? And the idea here is for us, you see, and there are other things that we want to do, because I don't know if you know this, there are about 15 million Asian American Pacific Islanders in this country. And most of our native food, most of the native food that we eat, we still have to import from Vietnam, Thailand, China, India. And yet we know how to make all of them from seafood. Why not? Why not process and package the food here? There's the niche for it, because the quality is controlled. And then sell it here in this market. See, this is what we're working on at this point. And it would be great to have all of you joining us in this endeavor, because it can be replicated elsewhere. It can be moved to Biloxi and even Alabama, yes, even Alabama. We can move it there too after we've completed our side of it, right? So thank you. We appreciate and hope that, look forward to you joining us in this endeavor. Thank you.
So now, as requested, we've let a lot of time for questions. So if anybody has, yes, ma'am?
I was wondering, from your perspective, now that fishing has started to get involved, is it safe for us to be eating that fish? Because I know they are serving it at restaurants in Colorado where they're from, and selling it at grocery stores. And I always wonder, is it safe for my family?
Could you repeat the question?
The question is whether Gulf seafood is actually safe to eat. There is controversy around that issue, so I'm not going to tell you 100%. The position that my organization has been taking is, if you live in New York or New Jersey or Massachusetts or California, it is probably safe to eat. That because the levels that that FDA has set, right, relate to somebody who eats 6 jumbo shrimp a month, I think it is. It's around a month or a year or something, which for somebody who has a shrimp cocktail every once in a while or whatever, But in the Gulf Coast, you don't, if you got a po' boy with 6 shrimp, you would send it back and tell them it's cheap. So, you know, in the Gulf, it's a much different. For Gulf coastal populations that eat a significant amount of seafood, there is a different question about the safety. So, I mean, our position is that probably in the broader context of the United States, it may be safe. In the context of a coastal community, no, it is not safe. We eat shrimp all the time. We eat fish. I mean, fishermen eat fish every single day, sometimes 2 and 3 days meals. So, I mean, I can't give you a definitive answer. Different organizations are taking different positions, but that's the position we've been taking. No, I mean, you know, this is it's kind of problematic because the issue is really, it is now tested more than it ever has been, okay? And you have to realize that not all of the Gulf was affected. There are parts of Florida that are catching fish that never saw a drop of oil. There are parts of Texas that never saw a drop of oil. We are being told, now how much I trust that I don't know, that they are now testing shrimp and fish more than they ever have. And they are telling us that the levels are sufficient to meet a requirement, like I said, 6 jumbo shrimp per, is it week or month? Do you know? It's a week. Pound. So for a person weighing 175 pounds, you can eat 6 jumbo shrimp a week. All right? Use your mic. Yeah. So I mean, I can't give you a definitive answer. What I'm telling you is, if you don't eat a lot of seafood, if you don't eat a lot of seafood, you are probably fine. If you eat a lot of seafood, I would be somewhat cautious. I mean, it depends. You know, if you just have a meal of like red snapper once every month or something, you go out to a restaurant, I don't think you have a problem. Our problem is that our people do not eat that way. You know, they do not come close to eating that way. As Casi said, I mean, you know, we eat a lot of fish and we expect a lot of fish on our plate when we get it. So, yes, ma'am?
Casi, thank you very much for your presentation. I also appreciated your presentation from Conservancy on restoration. But Casi, you mentioned the incident command. I'm from the New York area, and one of the things I'm very proud of is when there's a disaster such as 9/11, the global community comes around to support those who are really in the trenches. And I think the same thing happened a year ago when the global community again reached out to volunteer to help mitigate the effects of the disaster. But having said that, the incident command is a very highly structured place, and it's running, trying to address many different organizations. I'm also on the board of Sea Research Foundation up in Eastern Connecticut, and we were flooded with requests from volunteers. How can I help? Again, a wonderful human impulse, and it's really heartening to see that. But volunteers, as you know, need to be managed. So if in the first days of the event, and even up to a couple of months into it, if the incident command is flooded with requests, you know, saying we want to help a lot of volunteers, they have to make sure those volunteers are trained in hazmat. So only those who have been trained can possibly respond at that time. So I'm glad to see you found a way to manage the volunteer desire on a go-forward basis. But I think it's also fair to say that the incident command has to manage that process. So to say that you're turned away and that the incident command rejected help, I think is to leave a false impression. But I'd just like to say that it was important to manage that, considering that those volunteers in the initial days needed to be trained.
Well, my story is much more detailed, so I apologize for being flip about it. Mobile Baykeeper was actually invited into Unified Command after physically being removed from the building 3 times. So it's a lot more of a story than I've given, and I apologize, and I'll have a drink with you and share all the fun. But what we did when we got in, our purpose was to help manage the volunteers. The beauty of a Unified Command is when it comes into the community to help your community. It did not. It came into our community to manage our community. And it did not embrace our community or let our community be a part of the decision-making process that happened. So it was a very challenging situation. We got into Unified Command finally to force them to create a volunteer plan. We understood that everybody needed to be trained. We said that to every one of the 7,000 people who called. But we had the power, and we finally were able to create a volunteer field observer program. This, I believe, may have happened to some degree or another in San Francisco Bay when they had their tanker disaster. But Mobile Baykeeper and the Alabama Coastal Foundation created a volunteer field observer program. We trained citizens using the BP information, using the job aids from U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the NERDA job aids from NOAA. We put an entire project together, and we ended up training 300 people to daily and weekly monitor shoreline for impacts. It ended up creating a photo documentation that U.S. Fish and Wildlife is using for NERDA as backup documentation, natural resource damage assessment. But unfortunately, and I have many friends throughout the country with waterkeepers who have done and been in and worked with Unified Command, and it's been a beautiful thing. That was not the case with this disaster. It was not that simple. No. Unfortunately, it was incredibly challenging. I know that someone from some nonprofit organization made it into Unified Command. In Louisiana, I thought.
Not much.
We were in as in the Joint Information Center to help provide information back and forth. It was not a successful adventure. We have made those recommendations and that knowledge to everyone. We were interviewed by the Coast Guard and by the BP folks and by everyone else as to what were the failures, and unfortunately that was a major failure along the Gulf Coast.
Well, and there are also other failures. I mean, they had a lot of animal rescue groups who had actually been trained in all of that, and they refused to allow any of them in. And so there's an investigation because a lot of species that did not have to die died because BP contractors were the only ones that were allowed to bring the animals to shore. Even the rescuers were not allowed to go out that were contracted by BP. So many animals died that were not supposed to die. Many nests were crushed. Much habitat was destroyed. So there's an entire investigation of that. And they were doing hazmat trainings for all the vessel owners who were going out to do the oil intervention, whatever you wanted to call it. So it was a big failure, believe me. It was a major failure. Excuse me? We can't hear you. Okay. Can you give him a mic?
Hello. Everybody can hear me now, I guess. Yeah. I want to keep it really simple. I've flown all the way from Borneo. I'm an independent marine scientist, ROV pilot, photographer. I made a little movie documentary called Colors of the Gulf, thanks to Dr. Bill Hawkins behind me. And yeah, trailer's just gone out on Facebook, so you can tap into that. Hi, David. My question becomes, with regards to spatting oysters and respatting the Gulf and all these environmental reseeding projects, why are we really discussing this when we should really be looking at the reality of Corexit? And that's my question. And I'd really like to say, from a UK perspective, please, in America, cut the BS. Cut the BS, and let's get to the nitty-gritty and the facts. And BP, yeah, shambolic, absolutely, but we must move on in the right direction. And let's start at the simple things, the simplicity. We're not here to, you know, we're here to get it right, Bill? Okay. My question is there.
Okay, well, I guess if you're talking about, there are many of us who are working on trying to determine all of the ingredients of dispersant, and we are actually obtaining release of some of the ingredients in at least the aggregate. So there is a lot of research going on in that, in hopes of...
It needs to be public.
Well, I mean, we're trying to make it public. We're a public organization. So, you know, we hope to get that out to the public soon and to start working on, in hopes of getting EPA to do the testing they need to do to actually stop using dispersant.
When I would add one other thing to that too is the reason we're talking about oyster production and building is because we also have to focus on something that gives us hope in our community. And the BP oil disaster, the fact that 1.84 million gallons at a minimum was used despite every argument every day for 87 days, we did not win. We did not win. Did we fight it every single day for 87 days? Yes, absolutely, with expletives. But we did not win. So what we have to do is keep on fighting, keep demanding answers to the questions, and we are. But we also have to focus on fixing it. And that's where projects like this restoration and many, many other restoration projects are so critically important, is because we have to keep hope.
I mean, you do have to realize that these are communities that have faced 2 major disasters in less than 10 years. And in both, many of these communities have lost everything. Suicide rates are up, domestic violence is up, drinking is up. I mean, these are not communities that right now can really continue to look at the bad. We have to start looking at the future and the potential for growth and restoration. And I think both in Mobile and Dr. Vien's community, that's what they're trying to do, because otherwise you're not going to have a community. I mean, you know, there is nowhere else in the country right now that has faced these levels of disaster in this short a period of time. It is really devastating to most of these people. I mean, I've met people who only just rebuilt their house after Katrina. That's been 5 years that they have been displaced. So, yes, ma'am.
What some people don't know about me personally is I am
Thank you very much. Thank you. I will take another question. I did want to say, since Michelle brought this up, that for those of you who are around on Tuesday, we are actually having a briefing. It's going to be on the Hill in the Cannon office building, and it's a briefing and discussion on how the people of the Gulf can work with Congress to ensure restoration. It's at 10 a.m., room 5C, and we would love, on the 5th floor, and we would love all of y'all to be there. The question? Yes, ma'am? And then I'll take you, Jackie.
I'm so interested in aquaculture, and I'm from the Pacific, and we want to do a lot more aquaculture in the Pacific, but, there are a lot of environmental problems with aquaculture, and I just wonder, where's the source of best practices on this? I think your aquaculture park sounds like a wonderful idea, but are you giving sound advice about the right way to build it so that it doesn't cause its own environmental problems? 2 years ago, I attended this conference, and Chris Mann from the Huge Environmental Group was here and did a great presentation about aquaculture. I know it's here, I'm not sure if it's here this morning, but I'd like to find out how we can promote best practices in aquaculture so we can avoid more environmental problems.
Okay. So the question is, how can we adopt best practices in aquaculture? And I'll let Father Vien talk about it, and maybe then if questions are still here, David could talk about it.
Thank you. I appreciate the question. And David Guggenheim and I talked about it last night. He himself is getting a lot of flack from his own colleagues because when we're talking about land-based aquaculture, we're talking about a recirculating system that is really that is enclosed. And then yes, the answer to you is I am not trained in that at all, so I do look to the Ocean Foundation, I do look to the other experts, I do go to the universities. We are looking at working, and we have started already, but to go further with Louisiana State University, which does a lot of aquaculture work, so that it would advise us on it. Certainly, I am not a specialist in that area, so we are looking around. If you do have sources, I would appreciate that. I don't know, David, if you want to throw something in there too?
I mean, we are, the environmental groups in Louisiana, or at least in New Orleans, are working with the community because we're interested in the concept they're using, which is an entirely enclosed system. In fact, it's, I mean, it's not open to the environment. It is in a relatively hurricane-proof building with closed-loop systems. We don't say that it's, 100% we're watching and trying to work with them, but it's the first time I've ever been even open to discussing aquaculture. David?
Aquaculture. Are we on?
No, you're not actually.
Green light's on.
Yeah, it's on, but not loud enough.
Test.
There
Hello.
There you go.
No, it's a good question, and it's a fair question. Aquaculture has a bad name for a good reason, because most of it really stinks. And it's caused a lot of problems, and it's actually created a big challenge in terms of putting forward projects that have promise, because there's now a perception that aquaculture is a bad thing. There's no perfect form of aquaculture. What Father Vien talked about is exactly correct. We're talking about closed loop systems. These are recirculating systems that recirculate 99% of their effluent. There's no discharge to the environment, no chemicals or antibiotics. It has the same problem as open water aquaculture. What do you feed these things? And there's a lot of research going on right now. But the benefit that these systems have is that they are 10 to 15 times more efficient than open flow-through systems and open ponds. We're working closely with the newly formed Recirculating Farms Coalition. It's headed by Marianne Cuffone. This began as the Association for Sustainable Aquaculture as a project within Food and Water Watch here in Washington. It fledged on its own just a few weeks ago. It changed its name briefly to the Association for Sustainable Aquaponics to include the vegetables, and now has become the Recirculating Farms Coalition.
And these are the practitioners and the experts around the United States that we've brought into this project to advise us, because we have the exact same concern. This is both a conservation project and a community project, and we want to do it right. But the fact is, there aren't enough fish in the sea to feed us all, or the 9 billion of us that there will be on this planet by 2050, assuming that things don't come to a screeching halt at 6 p.m. today, Eastern time. And aquaculture has to be part of the solution if we're going to continue to eat fish as our species continues to eat fish. So this is a step in the right direction. I would say it's not a perfect step, but it's certainly head and shoulders above the other forms of aquaculture that's out there.
And if I can tell you that in the Gulf, people don't seem to realize this, the alternative is that they are really pushing to put aquaculture farms on unused oil and gas rigs. So any rig that is no longer in production, they want to put open nets. It's being pushed pretty significantly, and in fact, Senator Vitter at one point was pushing through a bill that would allow oil and gas companies to have their liability for those rigs waived if they transfer it to the ownership of an offshore aquaculture facility. So many of us are significantly looking, are seriously looking at trying to get alternatives, because I can tell you, I don't want open water fish farming on oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico. So Jackie's next, and then I'll take you. Here you go.
Thank you. Jackie Savitz from Oceana. The question of dispersants came up, and thank you all so much for all the work that you've done over the past year. You've all been amazing, and we've all been watching. During this bill, there were a lot of debates. Do we do open water burns? Do we use dispersants? And what became clear to anyone who it wasn't already clear to was there is no good way to respond to an oil spill, period. And what that means is if you don't like dispersants, and I love you all and I know this is a hard issue for you, if you don't like dispersants and you don't like open water burns, we got to figure out a way to stop drilling. And I know we can do it in a way that provides a just transition and creates new industries. I didn't even think of onshore aquaculture. Here's a whole nother example, clean energy. And I think there are ways to do it. And I realize it's a difficult issue, but I think that's what it brings me back to.
One more question at the lady in the...
I just have a question, because as a conservationist, I choose to see wildlife, fish as wildlife. And I'm wondering if we are thinking about conserving these marine ecosystems just for human consumption.
No.
Because that's what it sounds like.
No, I don't think that's true. That's why we're talking about aquaculture. The fact is, most of our fisheries in the Gulf are overfished, commercial fisheries. If we do not, and the juxtaposition the position we're in now, which is an interesting position, is that we have whole communities that are economically dependent on fish, who have been almost devastated by 2 disasters, right? To restore those fish, we may have to put those fishermen out of business, okay? Mm-hmm. Well, you can say that, but I have hundreds of thousands of people who are required to live.
Well, that's my question, how do we reconcile that?
Well, that's why we're trying to look at land-based aquaculture, because if we can find a sustainable, environmentally friendly system that would allow fishermen to do what they want, which is we can reduce the pressure on the natural populations, hopefully, and allow them to be restored. But our biggest obstacle to doing things like marine protected areas right now, I've been told only this last question, I'm sorry, but anyway, so, we are trying to find a way to allow our communities to survive and let the fisheries be restored. But I can tell you, the biggest obstacles right now to marine protected areas are both the recreational and commercial fishermen. They do not want them. They killed them before. They are fighting seriously, but they have the political power. Go ahead, Chris.
Can I just add that what you're getting at is part of restoration has to look at restoring populations that can support fisheries and communities in the Gulf of Mexico. But within that management structure, we also need to take into account the role of fish in the greater ecosystem to restore and protect key habitats, for example. So restoration to OSHA Conservancy anyway means providing for communities, but also within the broader context of a healthy Gulf of Mexico ecosystem.
And for Alabama, I just have to say what we've done and our connection of fishing and economy to the environment and the environmental resources is because that's how we sell it. Like, Mobile Baykeeper doesn't work on global warming because it doesn't exist in Alabama. So we do.
People don't believe it exists.
So we work with the tools we have, and quite frankly, with the tools we have, we're awfully darn good. But we've got a long way to go, and that's why we talk the way we talk. In this room, I could tell such a completely different story, but I have to live in my community and be of my community, and my community looks at our fishing industry, or looks at fish as an economic driver. So it's a hard battle and road that we walk, but you are 100% right. We are building the reefs we're building because we destroyed them over the last 50, 60, 70 years. And if we do it right, it will be so much more, it will be about so much more than just how much can I harvest this week. So thank you so much for your question.
Thank you so much.